The girl kissed the cowboy's horse goodbye like she already knew she would not live to see another sunrise. The wind moved slow through Dry Creek that evening, carrying dust, old whiskey, and the smell of rain somewhere far beyond the hills. Elias Turner stood near the stable fence with one hand resting on a rusted shovel while the last gold light of the day cut through the town like a dying fire. He noticed the girl the moment she stepped off the freight wagon. Small frame, light brown coat too thin for the cold, boots worn nearly through at the heel. She looked no older than 23, but her eyes carried the kind of tired most people earned after 50 years and 2 bad winters. Nobody helped her down from the wagon. Nobody even looked at her twice. Dry Creek had stopped caring about strangers a long time ago. The driver tossed her bag into the mud and rode off without a word. She picked it up slowly like her arms hurt. Then she saw the horse. Buck. Old gray coat. Scar above the left eye. The horse watched her in silence while steam rolled from his nose into the cold evening air. For the first time since arriving, the girl smiled. It was small, weak, but real. Elias noticed that too. Stables closed, he said. His voice came low and rough from years of dust roads and lonely miles. The girl nodded quickly. I know. I just need somewhere warm till morning. Elias studied her for a second. People lied often in the West, especially people running from something. But she did not look dangerous. She looked exhausted. He opened the stable gate without another word. She thanked him softly and stepped inside. The lantern hanging near the stall painted warm light across the hay and wooden beams while rain clouds gathered outside town. Buck lowered his head toward her. Strange. The old horse usually hated strangers. The girl reached carefully into her coat pocket and pulled out half an apple wrapped in cloth. Here, she whispered. Buck ate from her hand gently. Elias leaned against the doorway, watching. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated just long enough to matter. Claire. No last name. Just Claire. An hour later, Elias returned with a wool blanket and found her sitting beside Buck in the straw. She had fallen asleep against the horse's shoulder while the lantern flickered beside her. Her face looked calmer there. Safer somehow. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Elias placed the blanket over her carefully and walked back toward the house. But sometime deep in the night, Buck began stomping softly inside the stable. Elias woke instantly. Cowboys learned to trust horses long before people. He pulled on his coat and stepped into the cold darkness. The lantern inside the stable still burned low. Claire stood beside Buck with tears running quietly down her face. Then she leaned forward, kissed the horse gently between the eyes, and whispered, I'm sorry. Before Elias could speak, she turned away from him. And by sunrise, she was gone. The sunrise came cold and gray over Dry Creek, the kind of morning that made the whole town look tired before the day even started. Elias Turner stepped into the stable expecting to hear the soft scrape of boots against hay or the quiet sound of someone trying not to be noticed. Instead, there was only silence. Buck stood near the open stall, ears forward, staring toward the eastern road beyond town. The blanket Elias had given Claire lay folded neatly beside the wall. That stopped him for a second. Most drifters stole what they could carry. She had left the warmest thing she owned behind. Elias moved slowly through the stable. The lantern had burned itself out sometime before dawn, leaving only the pale morning light sliding through the wooden slats. Then he saw it. A thin blue ribbon tied carefully around Buck's leather bridle. Clean. Deliberate. Like a goodbye note from someone who did not trust words anymore. Buck nudged Elias in the shoulder and let out a low breath. Yeah, Elias muttered softly. I know. The old horse refused to leave the stall. That was strange too. Buck had spent 15 years following Elias without hesitation through deserts, storms, flooded creeks, and cattle drives stretching hundreds of miles. But that morning the horse planted his hooves hard into the dirt and kept staring east. Elias frowned and checked the stall one more time. That was when he found the boots. Claire had pushed them halfway beneath the hay near the wall. Old brown leather. Women's size. Worn nearly smooth at the sole. Elias picked one up carefully and noticed dark stains near the stitching. Dried blood. Not much, but enough to tell a story she never spoke aloud. Outside, Dry Creek slowly crawled awake. A wagon rattled down Main Street. Someone hammered loose boards outside the barber shop. Piano music drifted faintly from the saloon even this early, tired notes floating through dusty air. Elias walked toward town carrying the boot under his arm. He stopped first at the general store. Old Mr. Bennett looked at the boot once and shook his head before Elias even asked a question. "Forget the girl," he said quietly while arranging canned peaches on a shelf. "Folks who come through here alone usually got reasons." Elias studied him. "You know her?" Mr. Bennett avoided his eyes. "I know trouble when I see it." By noon the whole town felt wrong. People noticed Elias asking questions, and every conversation died too quickly. A waitress at the diner nearly dropped a coffee pot when he mentioned Claire's name. Two men outside the saloon stopped talking the moment he walked past. Even Sheriff Holloway acted uneasy. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, boots on the desk, chewing slowly on tobacco that smelled stale in the hot office air. "You chasing a missing girl now?" Holloway asked. Elias set the boot on the desk. "Girl left this behind." The sheriff barely glanced at it. "Then maybe she wanted to." Elias turned to leave. "You ever notice," Holloway called after him, "how some people disappear and the town sleeps better afterward?" Elias paused near the doorway. Dust moved through the sunlight between them. "No," he said calmly. "But I notice when everybody suddenly gets scared of the same name." That evening Buck still refused to face any direction except east. That night the rain finally came to Dry Creek. Not hard. Just a cold, steady drizzle that turned the road slick and painted the windows silver beneath the lantern light. Elias Turner sat alone inside the stable, sharpening an old horseshoe nail against a stone while Buck rested. Nearby, still uneasy. Every few minutes the horse lifted his head toward the eastern road like he expected someone to return through the dark. Elias had seen animals remember people before, but never like this. Around 8 o'clock he slipped on his coat and headed back into town. Water dripped from the edges of the wooden rooftops while muddy wagon tracks cut through Main Street. Most folks stayed indoors during weather like that. Easier to mind your own business when rain covered the sound of trouble. Elias stopped beneath the faded awning outside Mercer's Laundry and noticed light glowing through the front window. The old place smelled of steam, soap, and wet cotton the second he stepped inside. Mrs. Mercer stood over a wash basin with her sleeves rolled high past her elbows, gray hair tied tight behind her head. She looked up once, then back down again. "We are closed," she said. Elias reached into his coat pocket and placed the blue ribbon carefully on the counter between them. Mrs. Mercer froze. Completely. Water dripped from her hands into the basin while the room fell quiet, except for rain tapping the windows. Elias watched her face lose color little by little. "You know who this belongs to," he said softly. The old woman swallowed hard. "You should not be carrying that around town." "Why?" Mrs. Mercer glanced toward the front window to make certain nobody stood outside listening. Then she lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "Because people around here pretend certain things never happened." Elias stayed silent. That usually made people talk longer. Mrs. Mercer dried her hands slowly with a cloth towel. "The girl came here 3 months ago. Used to wash clothes for the Whitmore family up on the hill." Elias frowned slightly. Everybody in Dry Creek knew the Whitmore estate. Largest ranch house within 50 miles. White columns. Iron gates. More land than some towns. Victor Whitmore practically owned half the valley. "Claire worked there?" Elias asked. Mrs. Mercer nodded once. Quiet girl. Kept to herself. But polite. Always polite. She stared at the ribbon again. She wore this every Sunday. Rain thundered softly on the roof above them. Elias leaned. One shoulder against the counter. "Sheriff acts nervous when I mention her." Mrs. Mercer let out a tired breath. "Because Claire Whitmore is supposed to be dead." The words settled heavy between them. Elias did not move. "Dead how?" "Fever," they said. Mrs. Mercer looked down. "Buried outside town near the Cedar Hill Cemetery. Closed casket. Happened fast." Elias thought about the frightened look in Claire's eyes inside the stable. The blood in her boots. The apology whispered to a horse in the middle of the night. None of it sounded like someone already buried. "You believe that story?" he asked. Mrs. Mercer took longer to answer this time. "I believe rich families bury the truth deeper than poor families can afford to." Somewhere outside, boots splashed through muddy streets. The old woman stepped closer fast and grabbed Elias gently by the sleeve. Fear trembled in her voice now. "Listen to me carefully. If the Whitmores find out you are asking questions, they will make your life difficult. That family does not lose control over things." Elias picked up the ribbon from the counter. "People are not things." Mrs. Mercer looked at him sadly. "In Dry Creek, she whispered. Sometimes they are. When Elias stepped back outside, Buck suddenly let out a loud, restless cry from the stable 3 buildings away. And for the first time since Claire vanished, Elias noticed someone standing across the street watching him through the rain. The man across the street disappeared the second Elias stepped into the rain. One blink, and he was gone between the dark alleys behind the barber shop like he had never been there at all. But Elias knew what he saw. Tall frame, black coat, hat pulled low. Watching. The kind of watching that carried purpose. Dry Creek suddenly felt smaller after that. Tighter. Like the whole town had decided to breathe quieter around him. Elias crossed the muddy street toward the saloon while thunder rolled low above the valley. The Silver Lantern stayed open later than every other business in town. Men drank there when they wanted to forget something. Or hide from it. Warm whiskey air and cigarette smoke wrapped around him the second he stepped inside. Hey. Piano played near the back wall, slow and tired. Nobody looked happy in the room. Just restless. Elias scanned the crowd once before moving upstairs toward the boarding rooms. Mrs. Doyle sat behind a narrow desk near the stairway, knitting beneath a flickering oil lamp. Thin woman. Sharp eyes. She looked like someone who noticed more than she ever said aloud. Need a room? She asked without looking up. Looking for one somebody else used. That made her pause. Elias placed 2 silver coins on the desk beside the blue ribbon. Mrs. Doyle's knitting needle stopped moving immediately. You people really should stop carrying that thing around, she muttered. Elias leaned closer. Claire stayed here. The woman glanced toward the saloon downstairs before answering. 3rd room on the left. Stayed about 6 weeks. Why leave? Mrs. Doyle gave a dry laugh without humor. Around here? Women leave for one of 3 reasons. Fear, marriage, or money. Which one was hers? Mrs. Doyle finally looked him straight in the eyes. Fear. Elias took the room key without another word. The hallway upstairs smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and lavender soap. Rain tapped softly against the narrow windows while floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Room 3 stood at the far end near the back staircase. Small room. Iron bed frame. Wash basin. Thin curtains moving gently from cold air slipping through cracked boards. At first glance it looked empty like every other forgotten boarding room in the West. Then Elias noticed the floor beneath the bed. One plank set slightly higher than the others. He knelt slowly and pried it loose with his pocket knife. Inside the hollow space rested several folded Bible pages tied together with string. Old paper, torn carefully by hand. Elias unfolded the first sheet beneath the lantern light. Most of the verses had been crossed out except one sentence underlined twice in faded pencil. Deliver me from hidden things. His jaw tightened slightly. The second page carried handwriting. Small, uneven, rushed. Do not let them send me back. Elias read it twice. Beneath the message sat a rough map drawn in charcoal. A narrow river. Cedar Hill. Then farther east. Into the mountains one name circled hard enough to nearly tear the paper. Silver Canyon. Outside the room, footsteps suddenly stopped in the hallway. Elias lifted his eyes slowly toward the door. Silence. Then one quiet knock. Not aggressive. Careful. Almost nervous. Elias slid the papers inside his coat and opened the door halfway. A young saloon waitress stood there holding a tray with untouched coffee cups. She could not have been older than 19. You need to leave this alone, she whispered quickly. Her eyes darted toward the staircase behind her. Why? Elias asked. The girl swallowed hard. Because Claire was not the first one. Before Elias could ask another question, someone downstairs shouted the waitress's name sharply. Fear flashed across her face. She hurried away immediately, leaving one thing behind on the floor near Elias's boot. A small silver button from a child's coat. By the next morning, Dry Creek no longer felt like a town pretending not to notice Elias Turner. Now it felt like a town watching him back. The rain had passed during the night, leaving puddles across Main Street that reflected pale gray clouds drifting low over the valley. Elias sat outside the stable tightening Buck's saddle straps while the old horse kept turning his head toward every sound behind them. Restless again. Nervous. Elias slipped the small silver button into his coat pocket beside Claire's ribbon and unfolded the charcoal map one more time. Silver Canyon sat nearly 30 miles east through narrow mountain trails most folks avoided after dark. But something else bothered him more than the map. The waitress's words from upstairs. Claire was not the first one. A wagon rolled slowly past the stable. The driver stared too long before moving on. 20 minutes later, two men stood outside the barber shop pretending to fix a broken wheel while keeping their eyes on Elias the entire time. Neither one looked familiar. Clean boots. Expensive coats. Not ranch hands. Not miners. Elias noticed details for a living. That was how a man survived long cattle drives and lonely winters. And those men carried themselves like hired watchers. Around noon, Elias walked toward the diner for coffee. Conversation stopped the moment he entered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the cook behind the counter looked away too quickly. Elias took a seat near the window. The waitress from upstairs the night before was gone. In her place stood an older woman filling cups with shaking hands. "You asked too many questions," she muttered quietly while pouring coffee. Elias looked out the window toward the street. "Seems everybody already knows the answers." Before the woman could reply, the diner door opened. Sheriff Holloway stepped inside, carrying rain on his coat shoulders and dust on his boots. He moved slowly through the room until he stopped beside Elias's table. "Walk with me," the sheriff said. Outside, cold wind pushed through town hard enough to rattle loose signs above the stores. Holloway kept his hands near his belt while they walked past the church toward the edge of Dry Creek. "You ever hear of a man named Victor Whitmore?" the sheriff finally asked. Elias almost laughed softly. "Hard not to." Holloway nodded once. "Whitmore built half this town after the railroad dried up. Paid debts, bought farms, helped families through winter." He stopped walking and looked toward the hills where the Whitmore estate sat high above the valley like a white crown. "Men around here do not cross him unless they plan on leaving afterward." Elias studied the sheriff carefully. "That a warning?" "That is me trying to keep peace." Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver button. "Little girl lose this somewhere." Holloway's face changed immediately, just for a second, but Elias caught it. The sheriff looked away toward the road. "Where did you get that?" "Boarding house." Holloway rubbed tired fingers across his jaw. "Listen carefully. There are stories buried around Dry Creek that should stay buried. Because they are lies." Holloway did not answer. A rider suddenly appeared at the far end of town, coming hard through the mud. Horse breathing heavy. Coat soaked from travel. The rider stopped near the sheriff and handed him a folded paper without speaking. Holloway read it once, and his expression tightened. Then he looked directly at Elias. "You need to leave town today." Elias stayed calm. "Why?" The sheriff folded the paper slowly. "Because Victor Whitmore just found out somebody has been asking about Claire." At that exact moment, Buck let out another loud cry from the stable down the road. Not fear this time. Recognition. Elias turned sharply toward the sound and saw a figure standing beside the stable fence wearing Claire's brown coat. Elias started toward the stable the second he saw the brown coat beside the fence, but the figure disappeared behind the building before he crossed half the street. Buck kept stomping against the dirt inside the stable, breathing hard through his nose. Sheriff Holloway stayed back near the church, watching with the kind of expression men carried when they already knew trouble was coming and no longer believed they could stop it. Elias reached the stable door and pushed inside fast. Empty. Only the smell of hay, wet leather, and horse sweat hanging in the cold air. Buck turned sharply toward the rear stall and nudged the wall with his nose. Elias moved closer and noticed something tucked between two loose boards behind a feed barrel. A folded piece of cloth. He pulled it free carefully. It was Claire's coat, still damp from rain. One sleeve torn near the wrist. And hidden inside the pocket sat a small brass key attached to a paper tag with faded writing. Cedar Hill Chapel. Elias stared at the key for a long second. Then he heard footsteps outside. Two men entered the stable without hurrying. Same clean boots he had noticed earlier in town. One tall and thin with silver gloves. The other broad-shouldered with a dark vest buttoned all the way to his throat despite the heat. Neither man smiled. "Mr. Turner," the taller one said politely, "you have become difficult to ignore." Elias rested one hand lightly on Buck's saddle. "That usually means somebody is nervous." The broad man glanced around the stable. "You are asking questions about someone who no longer concerns this town." Elias looked at him calmly. "Funny thing about dead people. They usually stay buried." Silence settled heavy between them. Rainwater dripped slowly from the stable roof outside. The taller man adjusted his gloves with careful fingers. "Victor Whitmore appreciates privacy. Then he should buy more land," Elias replied. The broad man stepped forward slightly, not threatening, but close enough to make his meaning clear. Take your horse. Ride west. Forget the girl. Elias noticed something then. The broad man had mud on his boots. Dark red, clay mud. Not from Dry Creek. The same color marked on the charcoal map near Silver Canyon. Elias kept his face neutral. And if I do not? The taller man sighed softly like a disappointed banker. Then this town may become uncomfortable for you. Buck suddenly pinned his ears back and shifted hard against the stall. The old horse never reacted badly without reason. Elias glanced past the men toward the open stable door and saw someone standing far down the road beneath the cottonwood trees. Small figure. Woman's frame. Brown hair moving in the wind. Claire. She stood there only 2 seconds before turning toward the eastern hills. Elias stepped sideways instantly, but the broad man blocked the doorway. Move, Elias said quietly. You are chasing a ghost, the taller man answered. Elias looked him directly in the eye. No, I think you are. Something changed in the man's expression at those words. Just a flicker, but enough. Enough to confirm fear. Elias shoved past them and stepped into the road, but by then the figure near the trees was gone. Only empty wind moving through branches. The eastern hills sat dark beneath gathering clouds. Silver Canyon somewhere beyond them. Behind Elias, the taller man spoke one last time. There is no future waiting for you up there. Elias picked up Claire's coat from under his arm and noticed a faint smell still clinging to the fabric. Lavender soap from Mercer's laundry. Fresh. Not days old. Maybe not even hours. He looked toward the mountains again, while Buck let out another low, restless breath behind him. Then Elias noticed one final thing sewn carefully into the inside lining of the coat. 3 small letters stitched in white thread by hand. YMW. The letters sewn inside the coat stayed in Elias Turner's mind the entire night. YMW. Not Claire Whitmore. Not even close. He sat, alone beside the stable lantern while Buck slept lightly nearby, the old horse twitching his ears at every sound outside. Wind moved through Dry Creek with the hollow whistle of winter coming early. Elias unfolded the coat again and ran his fingers carefully across the white stitching. The thread looked old. Hand-sewn. Done with care by someone patient enough to hide a name instead of removing it. Around dawn he rode toward Cedar Hill Chapel with Buck moving steady beneath him through wet dirt roads still dark from yesterday's rain. The chapel sat nearly 2 miles outside town surrounded by crooked cedar trees and weathered gravestones leaning sideways from age. No preacher lived there anymore. Just an abandoned church with broken windows and a rusted bell that had not rung in years. Elias tied Buck near the fence and approached the wooden doors. The brass key from Claire's coat slid perfectly into the old lock. That alone made his stomach tighten. Someone had wanted her to come here secretly. Dust floated through pale morning light inside the chapel, while the smell of old wood and candle smoke lingered in the cold air. Most of the pews sat overturned. Water stains spread across the ceiling like dark bruises. Elias moved slowly toward the altar until he heard something shift softly behind him. He turned immediately. A little girl stood near the back wall, beside the broken piano. 8 years old at most. Thin frame. Barefoot despite the cold. She wore a brown sweater several sizes too large and held a rag doll missing one button eye. The girl stared at Elias without fear. Without blinking. You should not be here, Elias said gently. The child did not answer. Then he noticed something else. She could not. A faint scar rested near her throat beneath the collar of her sweater. Not fresh. Old. He lowered his voice. Did Claire send you? The girl looked toward the chapel basement door. Just one quick glance. But enough. Elias moved carefully across the room and opened the basement entrance. Cold air drifted upward carrying the smell of damp stone and ashes. He lit a lantern and descended slowly into darkness. The basement looked empty at first. Then the lantern. Light reached the walls. Drawings. Dozens of them. Crude charcoal sketches covering nearly every wooden beam and stone surface. Children holding hands. Wagons moving east. Mountains. Horses. And over again one woman with long hair standing beside them. Claire. Elias stepped deeper into the room. Small blankets lay folded neatly against one wall. Tin cups stacked nearby. Someone had hidden children here recently. Then he saw the final drawing near the far corner. Claire kneeling beside 3 children beneath a large black symbol painted over a mine entrance. Silver Canyon. Elias felt the room grow colder around him. Footsteps creaked softly upstairs. He climbed back quickly and found the little girl waiting near the altar, holding something in her hand. A photograph, old and faded around the edges. Elias took it carefully. 3 children stood beside a younger Claire in front of the Whitmore Ranch house. But one detail stopped him cold. Written across the back in elegant handwriting were the words Property Inventory, Spring 1878. Elias looked up sharply at the girl. Who wrote this? The child slowly pointed toward the hills above Dry Creek, where the Whitmore estate stood beneath gray morning clouds. Then church bells suddenly echoed faintly through the valley from town below. Not a funeral bell. A warning bell. Someone in Dry Creek had discovered Elias was gone. The warning bell echoed across Dry Creek 3 more times before falling silent. Elias Turner rode back toward town with the old photograph tucked safely inside his coat, while the little girl from the chapel watched him leave from the doorway, without making a sound. Buck moved faster than usual beneath him, almost anxious to get ahead of whatever waited back in town. The closer Elias got to Main Street, the stranger everything felt. Store windows had been shut tight. Curtains drawn. Men stood in small groups, speaking quietly before stopping the second they noticed him. Fear traveled fast in places like Dry Creek. Faster than truth ever did. Sheriff Holloway stood outside the jail office, smoking with tired eyes and a jaw that looked tighter than before. "You should not have gone to that chapel," he said as Elias dismounted. "Funny thing is," Elias answered calmly, "nobody there seemed surprised I had the key." Holloway flicked ash into the dirt and looked away. "Some doors stay locked for a reason." Elias reached into his coat and held up the photograph. The sheriff stared at it only 1 second before his face lost color. "Where did you find that?" "Basement under the chapel." Holloway lowered his voice instantly. "Put that away." Elias did not move. "Property inventory," he said quietly. "That what Whitmore calls children." The sheriff rubbed both hands over his face like a man carrying too many sleepless nights. "You think you understand this town after 3 days?" "No," Elias replied. "I think this town stopped understanding itself years ago." Before Holloway could answer, a black carriage rolled slowly down Main Street, pulled by 2 white horses. The entire road seemed to quiet around it. Even the piano inside the saloon stopped playing. Elias watched the carriage stop outside the hotel across from the bank. A tall older man stepped down carefully onto the muddy street wearing a dark gray coat and polished boots untouched by dirt. Silver hair, straight posture, calm eyes that carried the confidence of someone used to being obeyed without raising his voice. Victor Whitmore. The ranch owner glanced once across the street and locked eyes with Elias immediately. No surprise there. Like he had already known exactly what Elias looked like before arriving. Holloway muttered softly under his breath, "Now you really should leave." But Elias stayed where he was. Whitmore crossed the street slowly while townspeople pretended not to watch. The old rancher stopped only a few feet away. "Mr. Turner," he said politely. His voice sounded smooth and educated, almost gentle. "I hear you have developed concern for a troubled young woman." Elias noticed the expensive silver watch chain near Whitmore's vest and the faint smell of cedar cologne beneath the rain air. Nothing about the man looked cruel. That made him harder to read. "Funny thing about concern," Elias answered. "It usually starts when people begin lying." Whitmore smiled slightly at that. Not angry, just disappointed. Claire suffered from confusion. She believed stories that were not real. Elias reached into his coat again and showed him the photograph. The smile disappeared instantly, only for half a second, but enough. Whitmore recovered quickly. "Old records," he said smoothly. "Nothing more. Children hidden beneath a church seems like more." Holloway shifted uneasily beside them. Whitmore finally looked toward the sheriff. "I trusted Dry Creek to remain peaceful." The sheriff lowered his eyes. That alone told Elias more than words could. Whitmore turned back toward him. "There is an abandoned mining trail east of Silver Canyon," he said quietly. "Dangerous place. Unsafe roads. Men disappear there." Elias held his gaze. "And women." For the first time, Whitmore looked tired instead of powerful. Just one flicker beneath his calm expression. "Especially women," he answered softly. Then he stepped back toward his carriage before stopping one final time. "If Claire Whitmore contacts you again," he said without turning around, "ask her why she kept children hidden underground instead of bringing them home." The carriage rolled away slowly through the silent town, while those words settled heavy in Elias's chest. Because deep down, for the first time since this began, he realized something worse than fear. Maybe Claire had not been running from Dry Creek. Maybe she had been protecting those children from it. That night Elias Turner could not sleep. The wind outside the stable carried the sharp smell of cedar and distant rain, while Buck shifted restlessly against the wooden stall every few minutes. Victor Whitmore's words stayed lodged in Elias's mind like a splinter he could not pull free. Ask her why she kept children hidden underground instead of bringing them home. It sounded reasonable at first, almost compassionate. But the longer Elias thought about it, the less it fit the fear he had seen in Claire's eyes. People hiding guilt did not apologize to horses in the middle of the night. Sometime after midnight, Elias unfolded the old photograph again beneath lantern light. 3 children beside Claire. Property inventory spring 1878 written neatly across the back. His eyes moved slowly over every detail this time. The ranch house in the background. The fence line. The shadows. Then he noticed something strange near the corner of the image. A little boy stood partially cut off from the frame, wearing a metal tag around his neck. Elias leaned closer. Numbers. Not a name. Just numbers. A cold feeling settled into his chest. Buck suddenly lifted his head toward the stable door. Someone stood outside. Elias reached for the lantern and opened the door carefully. Sheriff Holloway waited beneath the moonlight with his hat pulled low and exhaustion written all across his face. You always sneak around this quiet? Elias asked. Holloway stepped inside slowly. I came alone. That mattered. Elias could tell from the sheriff's voice. Holloway removed his gloves carefully and stared at the photograph in Elias's hand before speaking again. I knew one of those children. Elias stayed silent. Holloway looked older suddenly. Not weak. Just worn down by too many years keeping secrets alive. Little boy named Samuel. Disappeared 4 years ago. People blamed Claire. Holloway shook his head. No body. No proof. Whitmore told everybody the boy ran away with railroad drifters. He paused. His mother drank herself into the grave believing it. Wind moved softly through the stable cracks while Buck watched the sheriff closely. Holloway lowered his voice further. There were others before Samuel. Farm children. Orphans. Runaways nobody important searched hard enough for. Elias studied him carefully. And you did nothing? The question landed hard. Holloway accepted it without anger. I tried once. Silence followed. Long enough to hurt. What happened? Elias finally asked. The sheriff looked toward the dark hills beyond town. Victor Whitmore owns debts all over this valley. Men keep quiet when their homes depend on another man's mercy. Elias folded the photograph slowly. You still have not answered the real question. Holloway frowned. Which question? Why are you here tonight? The sheriff reached into his coat and placed a folded map on the hay beside Elias. Different from Claire's map. Older. More detailed. Mining tunnels. Marked beneath Silver Canyon in black ink. There is an entrance here, Holloway said quietly, pointing near the eastern ridge. Old transport route from the mining days. Nobody uses it anymore. Elias looked up sharply. You think Claire is hiding there? Holloway hesitated. I think somebody is. Outside, thunder rolled faintly through the mountains. Holloway stepped toward the stable door before stopping one final time. You asked me earlier if this town lies. He glanced back over his shoulder. Truth is, Dry Creek stopped asking questions because asking questions became dangerous. Then he walked into the darkness and disappeared down the road alone. Elias looked back down at the map beneath the lantern glow. Near the bottom corner, almost too faded to notice, someone had written 5 words in trembling pencil years ago. If found, protect the children first. Elias Turner left Dry Creek before sunrise with Buck carrying them east toward Silver Canyon through narrow mountain trails soaked from last week's rain. Cold fog drifted low between the pine trees while loose rocks cracked beneath the horses' hooves. Sheriff Holloway's map stayed folded inside Elias's coat beside Claire's blue ribbon and the old photograph. The deeper he rode into the mountains, the quieter the world became. No wagons. No birds. Just wind sliding through cedar branches and the steady sound of Buck breathing beneath him. Around midday, the trail narrowed beside a steep ravine where rusted mining rails disappeared into darkness below. Silver Canyon. Elias dismounted slowly near the entrance of an abandoned tunnel half hidden by fallen timber and weeds. The smell reached him first. Smoke. Fresh smoke. Someone had used the place recently. Buck refused to step closer. The old horse planted his hooves hard into the dirt and lowered his head uneasily. Elias rested one hand against Buck's neck. Stay here. He lit a lantern and entered the tunnel alone. The mine air felt cold enough to bite through his coat. Water dripped somewhere deep inside the darkness while old support beams groaned softly overhead. Then Elias saw them. Tiny handprints pressed into the dust along the tunnel wall. Children. Several of them. He followed the tracks deeper underground until faint light flickered ahead. A hidden room opened beyond the tunnel bend. Blankets. Empty soup tins. Candles burned low beside crates stacked carefully against the wall. Someone had turned the abandoned mine into a shelter. Elias stepped closer to the crates and froze. Names had been written across the wood in white paint. Samuel Reed. Martha Bell. Jonah Pierce. Missing children from Dry Creek. Some names scratched out. Others marked with small crosses beside them. Elias felt cold settle deep into his chest. Then a voice came softly from the darkness behind him. You should not have come alone. Elias turned instantly. Claire stood near the tunnel entrance wrapped in a dark wool coat with lantern light trembling across her face. She looked thinner now. Tired. But alive. Real. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried too much weight. Finally Elias held up the photograph from the chapel. Property inventory? Claire looked away immediately. Shame crossed her face like a shadow. I tried to get them out before Whitmore found out. Elias studied her carefully. Who are these children? Claire stepped closer to the crates and rested trembling fingers across one of the painted names. Children nobody important searched for. Her voice sounded hollow from exhaustion. Runaways. Orphans. Workers brought through the mining camps. Elias frowned. Whitmore was taking them. Claire shook her head slowly. Not just him. She looked up at Elias with tears gathering quietly in her eyes. There were buyers coming through the railroad camps. Men with money. Men who called children labor contracts. The lantern flame cracked softly between them. Elias said nothing. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. I found records hidden inside the Whitmore office 3 months ago. Names. Ages. Payments. Her breathing trembled now. When Victor realized I had seen them, he tried to send me away east. Elias reached slowly into his coat and removed the blue ribbon. Claire stared at it silently. Why come back to Dry Creek? He asked quietly. Because some of the children were still here. She looked toward the dark tunnels behind her. I could not leave them. Somewhere deeper inside the mine, a child suddenly coughed softly in the darkness. Elias turned toward the sound immediately. Then more movement followed. Small figures slowly emerged from hidden corners beyond the tunnel walls. 5 children. Dirty faces. Thin coats. Frightened eyes watching him carefully beneath the lantern glow. One little girl stepped closer to Claire and grabbed her hand tightly. Elias looked at them in silence while understanding finally settled over him like winter snow. Claire Whitmore had never been hiding from the town. She had been hiding the town from the children. The children inside the mine barely spoke above whispers. One boy slept wrapped in a torn railroad blanket near the wall, while 2 younger girls shared a tin cup of soup beside the lantern. Claire moved between them quietly, checking foreheads, adjusting blankets, keeping the candle flames low enough that no light escaped through the tunnel entrance. Elias Turner watched her carefully from across the hidden room. Nothing about her looked dangerous. She looked exhausted in the way people did when fear became part of daily life. One of the little girls tugged gently at Claire's sleeve and pointed toward Elias. Is he safe? She whispered. Claire looked at Elias for a long moment before answering. Yes. Something about the certainty in her voice unsettled him more than doubt would have. Elias crouched beside one of the wooden crates and noticed folded papers hidden beneath a blanket. Lists. Dates. Railroad schedules. Names of towns stretching east toward Nebraska and south into New Mexico territory. Escape routes. Claire noticed him reading and stepped closer quickly. Do not let the children see those. Elias lowered the papers slowly. How long have you been moving them? 6 months. His eyes lifted sharply. 6 months. Claire nodded once. Started with one boy from the mining camp outside Red Hollow. Then another child disappeared from Dry Creek. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself against the cold. After that I started paying attention. The lantern light flickered softly across the stone walls while distant wind moaned through the abandoned tunnels. Elias unfolded another paper carefully. Payments. Inventory numbers. Railroad transfer codes. Beneath one list sat a signature written in elegant ink. V. Whitmore. This is enough to destroy him, Elias said quietly. Claire looked away immediately. No, no. Her voice lowered almost to a whisper. Victor Whitmore is not the man who scares me most. Silence settled between them. Then she finally reached into her coat and removed a small leather ledger wrapped carefully in cloth. Smaller than a Bible. Heavy enough to matter. The railroad investors funded everything, she said. Men from Denver, St. Louis, even Washington. Elias took the ledger slowly. Names filled every page. Wealthy families, shipping companies, politicians, numbers beside children's initials. His stomach tightened. God, Claire's eyes glistened in the dim light. That is why nobody in Dry Creek asks questions anymore. One of the boys near the blankets suddenly sat upright in panic. They are coming back. Claire moved instantly beside him. No one is coming. I heard horses. Elias listened carefully. At first there was only wind. Then faintly through the mountain silence came the distant sound of riders somewhere above the canyon trail. More than one horse. Claire's face lost color immediately. They found the tunnel. The children began gathering blankets and bags without needing instructions. They had done this before. Too many times. Elias stepped toward the tunnel entrance and checked the revolver resting low against his belt. Claire grabbed his arm fast. No, he looked back at her. You got another plan? If they see you helping us, Whitmore will destroy your life too. Elias studied her face carefully. Claire. She froze slightly, hearing her own name spoken gently for the first time in days. Elias glanced toward the frightened children behind her. Somebody should have helped you sooner. The riders above grew louder now. Boots. Voices. Lantern light moving faintly through cracks in the old tunnel ceiling. Claire closed her eyes briefly, like someone already expecting the worst. Then Elias reached into his coat and tied the blue ribbon slowly around Buck's saddle strap near the tunnel entrance. Claire stared at it silently. You left this for a reason, he said softly. So tell me the truth. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I thought I was going to die that night. Elias nodded once. No shock. No pity. Just understanding. Claire swallowed hard before speaking again. There is one more child still inside Whitmore House. The sound of approaching horses stopped directly above them. Then heavy footsteps echoed near the tunnel entrance while lantern light spilled down into the darkness. And a familiar voice finally called out through the mine. Claire, Victor Whitmore said calmly from above. You have hidden long enough. The mine fell silent the moment Victor Whitmore's voice echoed through the tunnel. Even the children stopped moving. Lantern lights spilled down from the entrance above, long pale beams cutting through the darkness like prison bars. Claire stood frozen beside the crates while Elias Turner slowly stepped in front of the children without saying a word. Heavy boots scraped against stone overhead. Then Victor Whitmore descended into the tunnel, carrying his own lantern low at his side. Two men followed behind him, the same clean-coated watchers Elias had seen around Dry Creek since the beginning. Whitmore looked older underground somehow, tired around the eyes, less like a powerful ranch owner and more like a man who had spent years carrying something rotten inside him. His gaze settled first on Claire. You look cold, he said softly. Claire laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. You came all the way out here for concern? Whitmore ignored the question. His eyes moved toward the children gathered behind Elias. Something painful flickered across his face before disappearing again. Bring them back, he said quietly. This has gone far enough. Elias watched him carefully. Back where? Whitmore's jaw tightened slightly. Somewhere safer than a collapsing mine. Claire stepped forward instantly. Safe. Her voice cracked with disbelief. You locked children in train cars. One of Whitmore's men shifted uneasily behind him. The old rancher lowered his eyes briefly before speaking again. You think I built this? Claire stared at him in silence. Whitmore removed his gloves slowly, buying himself time like men did when truth hurt too much to hold directly. The railroad company approached me 8 years ago. Labor contracts, orphan relocation programs, temporary work permits. He looked around the tunnel heavily. At first I believed them. Elias frowned. And later, Whitmore looked toward the children. Later I realized men with money do not see children the same way poor people do. The tunnel air suddenly felt colder. Claire's eyes filled slowly with tears. Then why keep helping them? Whitmore answered without lifting his head, because by then too many powerful men were involved. Silence settled hard between them. One of the little girls behind Elias began quietly crying into her blanket. Whitmore looked at the sound immediately. Genuine shame crossed his face for the first time. "I tried to stop it last winter," he admitted softly. 3 investors disappeared from the contracts after that. Elias noticed it then. Fear. Not fear of Claire. Fear of somebody else entirely. "The ledger," Whitmore said carefully. "Where is it?" Claire clutched the small leather book tighter beneath her coat. "No," Whitmore looked almost desperate now. "You do not understand what happens if those names become public. People finally tell the truth." Claire shot back. "No," his voice hardened suddenly. "Men from Washington will bury every witness before they let those contracts surface." The words hung in the darkness like smoke. Elias studied Whitmore closely. For the first time since Dry Creek, the old rancher did not sound like a villain. He sounded trapped. One of the children tugged quietly at Claire's sleeve. "What about Emma?" the little boy whispered. Whitmore closed his eyes the second he heard the name. Claire looked at Elias slowly. "Emma is still inside the ranch house." Elias remembered the stitched initials hidden inside Claire's coat. "YMW your daughter?" he asked softly. Whitmore nodded once without speaking. Claire swallowed hard. "She found the records before I did." Her voice trembled now. "When she threatened to expose the railroad men, they took her east." The tunnel fell completely silent. Elias looked between them carefully while understanding settled into place piece by piece. Claire had never been Victor Whitmore's real daughter. Emma Whitmore had been. And somewhere inside all the lies and missing children, Victor Whitmore had been trying to protect the wrong girl because he could no longer save his own. Snow arrived early that year in Dry Creek. Thin white frost covered the rooftops by the first week of November, while cold wind rolled down from Silver Canyon, carrying the sharp smell of cedar and chimney smoke through town. People spoke quieter now. Doors stayed open longer for strangers. And nobody said Victor Whitmore's name the same way anymore. The ledger changed everything. Not overnight. Real change never happened that way in the West. But within weeks, federal marshals arrived from Denver carrying warrants and sealed documents. Railroad investors vanished from newspapers. Men who once walked proudly through town suddenly left before dawn without saying goodbye. Sheriff Holloway spent 3 straight nights escorting children safely west toward church shelters and ranch families willing to take them in. Nobody celebrated. It did not feel like victory. It felt like surviving a storm that should have drowned everybody years ago. Victor Whitmore never fought the charges brought against him. That surprised most people. He handed over land records, contracts, bank letters, even names of powerful men outside the territory before quietly retreating to the old ranch house on the hill. Some folks called him a coward. Others called him broken. Elias Turner only remembered the look on the old man's face inside the mine when Emma's name was spoken aloud. Claire stayed in Dry Creek only long enough to make certain every child from the tunnels found somewhere safe to sleep. After that, she packed quietly, same as she had arrived. 1 small bag, 1 brown coat, nothing more. The morning she planned to leave, snow drifted softly across the stable yard while Buck stood waiting beside the fence. Elias brushed frost from the old horses. Saddle without speaking much. Claire stepped closer slowly, hands buried deep inside her coat pockets against the cold. "I never thanked you," she said softly. Elias shrugged once. "You already did." Claire frowned slightly. Elias touched the blue ribbon tied around Buck's bridle. It had faded some from rain and dust, but he still had not removed it. Claire smiled for the first time in days. A real smile this time. Small, tired, honest. Wind moved gently through the stable while snowflakes melted against the lantern hanging above them. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Elias looked out toward the white hills beyond Dry Creek. "Town keeps going, I suppose." Claire lowered her eyes. "And you?" Elias thought about the question longer than expected. Then he looked back at her. "I think Buck would notice if somebody stopped visiting him." Claire laughed softly under her breath. The sound barely lasted a second, but it warmed the stable more than the lantern did. Outside, wagon wheels creaked faintly somewhere down Main Street, while church bells rang slow through the cold morning air. Claire stepped toward Buck one final time and pressed her forehead gently against the old horse's face. "Take care of him," she whispered. Buck breathed warm air into her coat sleeve like he understood every word. Elias watched quietly beside them. No speeches. No promises. The West taught people early that some things meant more when left unsaid. Claire finally turned toward the waiting wagon near the road. Halfway there, she stopped and looked back once. Snow drifted between them in silence. Emma loved horses too, she said softly. Elias nodded once. Claire smiled sadly. That is probably why he trusted you. Then she climbed into the wagon and disappeared slowly through the falling snow beyond Dry Creek. Years later, people still talked about the winter the town changed. Some remembered the federal men. Some remembered the missing children finally returning home. But old ranchers drinking coffee near the general store usually told a different story instead. They spoke about a tired girl who once kissed an old cowboy's horse goodbye before vanishing into the dark, and how after that winter, a faded blue ribbon somehow kept appearing every first snowfall tied neatly around the same weathered bridle in Elias Turner's stable. Nobody ever saw who left it there, but Elias never removed it. Not once.